All right, Sergio, let's take some questions from the mailbag. And I want to start with the aforementioned Demetrius Andrade. Ryan on Instagram asked, do you see a path for Demetrius Andrade to get a big fight again?
No. And that's the thing when it comes to fighters like Demetrius Andrade, not just because he's a southpaw and he's not a big puncher and he didn't go for knockouts and he was a distance fighter, not because of all that. When you're a careful fighter first, and I was one of them, by the way, whenever you're a defensive fighter, once you lose that zero, then you become used goods and you're not as popular. It's that zero that people care about whenever you're that type of fighter. Bernard Hopkins, for a great example, one of the greatest fighters in the last 20 years. If he would have lost on the way up, I mean, he lost early in his career, but if he would have lost on the way up to a William Joppy or someone like that, you wouldn't have heard of Bernard Hopkins fighting Felix Trinidad or anyone else because it was that undefeated streak that he went through, but he was a careful fighter. A lot of careful fighters can't lose, man. They cannot lose. And they can't lose badly. So Andrade, the only thing he had going for him is the fact that he was a U.S. Olympian. He was a 2-division champion. I don't know who he beat in those 2 divisions, but he was a 2-division champion. And he had that shiny donut, that zero that everyone wanted. Once that zero's out of the record, then Andrade takes not 1 step, not 2 steps. He takes 5 steps back because people didn't want to watch him anyway. That's just the way it is. Sad to say, I was one of those quote-unquote boring fighters. But once you lose, people are glad to see you leave. It's c'est la vie.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough for him to get a big fight. The mistake that Andrade made was vacating his middleweight title and not fighting Janibek. Now, at the time, Janibek looked like a real killer at 160. But with the benefit of hindsight, we've seen Janibek in some fights where he hasn't looked all that great, and it made me believe that Andrade could have beaten him, could have at least outboxed him in their fight. And not only Sergio the zero, but having the title was another piece of leverage that he had at 160. Giving that up now, he's kind of in between. I've heard members of his team say he's going to drop back to 160. I think that's probably the smart decision if he does that, because at 168, I know Benavidez is a huge 68-pounder, but he looks small, didn't have much power there. I don't know what the pathway is to a big fight at 68. And 60 is problematic as well. Like, who's a big name for him to fight there? It seems like Carlos Adames is going to fight Hamza Shiraz at some point next year. That's 1 belt that's gone. He could go back down and try to challenge Janibek now. I mean, I don't know if there's any money in that.
He could say at 168. I mean, I would love to see a fight between him and Caleb Plant.
Yeah, but who's paying for that? Like,
I'm just saying, stylistically, that's an interesting fight.
Stylistically, it's a bad fight.
No, it's not.
Plant's a boxer.
What did I just say about Plant? He's a boxer with balls. He's a fighter that if he starts landing punches, he's going to go for the knockout. Andrade, at this point of his career, I think he has no choice but to start being more aggressive offensively because he's been sidelined too much, and he knows what it takes. I was part of that as well. The later part of my career, not only because I started losing my legs, because I wasn't getting opportunities anymore. I had to be more offensive, and that's why I started getting knockouts towards the end of my career. I think Andrade's on the same boat.
If they want to make that fight with Jermall Charlo,
there you go.
I wouldn't complain.
There you go.
I don't know if that's a big fight anymore.
I don't care.
It's not a big fight.
Dust that one off. It's fine.
I wouldn't mind seeing that on the undercard of any of the 2 PBC shows that are already made. Our friend Bernie Barmacel, PR maven to the stars. He asked the question, who wins this upcoming fight in December between Sergey Bohachuck and Israel Madrimov?
Shout out Bernie, man. He knows how to match make too, aside from PR. And I mean, that's an excellent matchup between two great fighters. I mean, Bohachuck just came up short in arguably a fight he could have won against Virgil Ortiz. He's a beast. He is a beast, but Madrimov has more
skills.
I don't want to say skills. I think he has
skills.
I think he has more tools in his bag, and the fact that he lost.
You can say bag.
In his toolbox. Okay. And he came up short against the best fighter in the world. No shame there. So yeah, I will favor Madrimov because he has that footwork. He has a little bit more. So yeah, I would slightly favor that. But man, don't put it past Bohachuck to do something great.
I think Bohachuck is a really fun fighter. I do think Madrimov is a level above him, though.
Yeah, well, slightly. Maybe not even a level.
Well, look, you go back and watch
maybe half a level.
You go back and watch that Ortiz fight, and yes, Bohachuck had 2 knockdowns in that fight, but beyond that, Ortiz outboxed him for most of that
And
fight.
Ortiz is a flat foot fighter.
And Madrimov isn't. I think Madrimov is going to stay out of the way, out of the line of fire from Bohachuck's best shots. And I can actually see that fight being like 9-3 Madrimov. It's not disrespectful to Bohachuck. I think Madrimov is elite at 54.
I don't think it'll be 9-3. I think it'll be
8-4 at best.
It'll be a competitive fight where you know who's clearly
Bohachuck's
ahead.
good from what I've seen when he's got opponents that will either stand in front of him or he can track down. Like Madrimov, if he's the fighter we saw against Terrence Crawford, in great shape, boxing on his toes, moving in and out, and with enough pop to really hurt you, right? Like the reason that Terrence Crawford fought so cautiously is he knew what was coming back. He knew Madrimov had some power there. So I just think it's a bad matchup for Bohachuck.
You know what? If the right promoter promotes that fight and they put it in a small ring, they don't get a 20 by 20 foot ring and they make it smaller. It could be an interesting fight. So they really got to concentrate on a small ring, depending on where that fight is and at what weight. You know, if would it be?
It's 54. They're 54? Both 54s. Yeah.
Yeah. I would love that fight, man.
It's going to happen. It's happening in December. Are you not aware of these
things? Just like Morel and Benavidez, man. I just found out about Morel Benavidez when you asked me about it. I'm like, whoa, that fight's happening? Yeah, sign me up. Both those fights.
I give you these questions a day in advance.
Yeah, and then I study them. So a day and a half ago, I was null and void. I didn't know.
By the way, speaking of ring size, I heard that one of the negotiating points for the Shakur Stevenson-William Zepeda fight is that Zepeda's team, Golden Boy, they want the 18 by 18 foot ring.
There you go.
I believe, at least I haven't heard this directly from Shakur's team, but they would prefer the 20 by 20, the usual size ring. So ring size definitely a variable in some of these fights.
Fucking A, it matters.
Last one. Marcos asks, is this the end for Jose Ramirez? We saw Ramirez really look average in his win, or his loss, I should say, to Arnold Barboza this past weekend. Credit Barboza, who had a good game plan, was in shape, outboxed Ramirez, but that was a fight that when you combine it with the way Ramirez looked against Rancis Barthelemy, you do start to wonder, like, what does Jose Ramirez have left? So I did ask a couple of people in Ramirez's team about his future, and the message I got back was, hey, we're going to wait, let Ramirez rest, get into April, May of next year, and see what our options are. They are keeping it on the table that Ramirez could move up to 147 pounds. Basically a career-long 140 pounder. So a move might do him some good. But again, he's another guy, 32 years old, where I think the climb back up the ranks is going to be really hard for him.
Marcos was his name?
Marcos asked the question.
I think we're probably going to see the end of Ramirez on the main event stage. And the fact that he is a former Olympian, a former champion. He got good money, and he's not the type of guy that's gonna want to take a few steps back in paycheck to get back on top, because he's been a marquee
seven-figure guy for a while.
He's been a marquee fighter for a long time. So I think that, and the fact that he has come back from inactivity in the last 4 years, only fighting once a year. The last thing he needs is another break. The last thing he needs is more inactivity, like his team wants him to after this fight, which wasn't a physical fight. So I think either he hops right back up there with another name and tries to win, or yes, it's the end of Ramirez as we know it on the main event stage.
I mean, we called the Ramirez fight against Maurice Hooker, which may have been the best performance of Ramirez to date. Yep. The guy we saw in the ring this past weekend was a shadow of that guy. Like
even against Barthelemy, he didn't look good.
Didn't look good. No, took, I don't know if they called it a knockdown, but it was a knockdown that he took in that fight against Barthelemy, and then, had trouble. Again, the Richard Comey fight was fine, and Comey was kind of washed at that point. He still needed 11 rounds to get him out of there. What I saw from Ramirez in that fight against Barboza was a guy that was reluctant to pull the trigger, right? Mm-hmm. He wasn't reluctant against Maurice Hooker. When he landed a good shot, that shot that wobbled Hooker in that fight that eventually led to the knockout, like he followed up with like 50 punches, just threw a bunch of them against Barboza, who is not a big puncher. Every time he tried to close the gap, he wasn't throwing. And that's not the Jose Ramirez I'm used to seeing. So something was going on with him during this fight. Maybe it's age, maybe it's weight. We both agree didn't look that great during the fight week, cutting back down to 140. Maybe a move up to 147 will revive him. And he does still have a name that somebody will give him a decent fight. But winning those fights at this age, I don't know, man. It's another one. I don't really see it.
I don't see it either. I think we've seen the end of him. I just answered the question.
And we have seen the end of this episode of the show.
The Mexican Mark Twain, I'm out.